Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, The Road to COP30. I'm Bruna Santos, Director of the Brazil Institute here at the Wilson Center. It's a pleasure to have you all with us for this timely discussion as we look ahead to COP30. Today, we are honored to welcome an ambassador with the mission to bring the world to the Amazon in 2025 for one of the most consequential UN climate conferences in the recent history. I'm really happy to welcome here today Ambassador André Corrêa do Lago, President of COP30. He's a seasoned Brazilian diplomat with a distinguished career spanning over 4 decades. He has held key diplomatic posts in Washington, Brussels, Buenos Aires, and beyond. He's a leading voice in Brazil's climate and energy diplomacy, and he was Brazil's chief negotiator of the Rio 20 conference and have served as Brazil's ambassador to Japan and India, and now leads Brazil's climate, energy, and environmental agenda at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Beyond diplomacy, he's also a published author of sustainable development and architecture. Ambassador, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bruna. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you. The Wilson Center was very important when I was living in Washington, D.C., and I used to come very often and learn a lot. So I'm very, very honored this time to be speaking at the Wilson Center.
That's great. And I look forward to host you in person here next time. So, Ambassador, let me start with the big and inevitable question. Brazil is hosting COP30 at a moment when the world is running out of time on climate action. What's the strategy to make this more than just another summit, but also to ensure that it delivers real and lasting change?
Well, it's a big challenge, and even more because of the international circumstances that we are living. Not only because the climate crisis, I think, is much more clearer than ever. No? So many countries suffering already consequences of climate change that were imagined for the 2030s or even later. So there is an anticipation of the climate crisis. So we are living a climate urgency. And at the same time, because of the questioning of some of the directions that we were taking in fighting climate change. So this curious mix in which we have more proofs than ever that climate crisis is here, and the fact that there is a retreat against some of the actions that had been taken for granted in recent years makes it a very big challenge. But we have also to recognize that people connected less and less with the COPs, in the sense that sometimes negotiators seem like people that are disconnected with the realities and in the ground. There is also a very strong sense that countries negotiate thinking of the lowest common denominator, because, as you know, all decisions of the COP have to be by consensus, so you need 196 countries to agree. So the perception that the COPs are solving people's concerns has decreased. So I think that we have to have, at the same time, a very effective communication on how these COPs are really solving some of the most pressing issues that we're living, and how we're going to translate those ideas that normally are reflected in texts, and how do we explain that these texts, in fact, have consequences and that solutions are possible, examples are at our disposal. So I think it is a major effort, and I hope, by the way, that the Wilson Center will support us in this way to Belém.
Of course, we're starting kicking off today this support. But Ambassador, I want to ask you another question about like the structure, the governance. So could you briefly explain to us your role and how it connects to the position that Anatoni has as COP CEO? And additionally, with the position of climate high-level champion still open, when do you expect to announce it? And how do these roles complement each other in shaping Brazil's leadership at COP30?
Well, that's a very good question because the COPs have these mysterious titles, and really, what do we do? So there is like many people that think that the president of the COP is only going to give the floor to the people during the COP. No, please, now Azerbaijan speak or whatever. In fact, the presidency of the COP is an effort that is going already in full speed because we have not to think of the conference itself, but the preparation of the conference, which means that we have to be very active, not only with the key countries and the key groups of countries that negotiate, but also participating in other meetings of other contexts, be it the IMF, be it the World Bank, or be it this year there is the conference on financing and development. So there are many elements, many moments during the year in which we have to act to make sure that we build the possible solutions that COP30 can bring. So it's a very intense work, and curiously also, I am a president designate because I will only become the president of the COP on the day that Belém opens. But the irony is that all presidents of COP work a lot more in the year before they are formally president, while they are president designate. So that's my role now, which is to prepare COP30. And then I continue president formally until the beginning of the COP in 2026. And we want to use, obviously, also 2026 to make sure that we give a continuity to what is going to be announced in COP30. So Anatoni is the CEO. The definition of CEO, according to each presidency, has a certain variety. But the fact is that Anatoni is a key person of the Ministry of the Environment and has an amazing career working for companies and for NGOs all over the world. So Anatoni complements in a wonderful way what I can bring as my experience as a diplomat for all those decades that I'm supposed to have learned something in 4 decades. Let's see if I can show that. But Ana and I get along amazingly well, and we've been working together for 2 years. I am the Secretary for Climate of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She is the Climate Secretary for the Ministry of the Environment. So we've been working together thinking of COP30 because, as you know, President Lula proposed to host the COP30 even before he became president. So we knew already when we became secretaries that we were going to have to work on the COP. We didn't know we were going to be president and CEO, but in our roles, we had to work on that. So I think that Ana is much closer to the environmental dimension of climate change. I am naturally more linked to the international negotiations dimension of climate change. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil is the ministry that is supposed to coordinate the position of Brazil based on each ministry's position and listening to the civil society, also listening to academia, listening to scientists, etc. So I think we complement quite well this, and we're going to be very flexible because I'll have to travel a lot, she'll have to travel a lot, and we will be, I think we are already in full understanding about this agenda. But we are, in fact, opening many discussions. So we don't have the answer. If you ask me, what are you going to present at COP30? We want to build it with countries. We cannot think that a country will arrive at COP30 full of solutions without listening to the others. So we are starting a very intense series of trips in which we're going to listen to the different stakeholders, also including naturally civil society, the scientists, economists, working very much with the Ministry of Finance and the central bank, because as we all know, finance is one of the key issues at the COP. And we will be working with the yet to be named champion. And the champion is somehow a personality that has to be a bridge between the presidency of COP30 and the business world, and to try to bring allies and to try also to see what the private sector expects from COP30. Probably next week we will have the name of the champion. And then we have the youth champion also, which is something relatively new, but also a decision of the previous COPs. The youth champion has to be under 35 and will be also the bridge between the presidency and the new generations that are going to suffer the consequences of everything wrong that my generation and others did.
That's excellent. Thank you for explaining that to all of us. So now moving to global geopolitics and COP30, with the US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, how do you see this impacting the global climate negotiations at COP30? And also, regardless of official US participation, what's the strategy to keep American stakeholders like local governments, business, civil society engaged in meaningful climate action?
So the withdrawal of the US from the Paris Agreement, which will be effective January 26th, is obviously something that has a strong impact on the negotiations and on the effectiveness of the agreement. Just to remember that the Paris Agreement was designed and negotiated to make sure that the US would come back to the main climate negotiations. Because as you don't remember because you're very young, but in the Kyoto Protocol, we had a very long negotiation with the US, extremely active. But at the end, when the negotiation ended, the American Senate did not allow the US to join the Kyoto Protocol. So for years, we had the Kyoto Protocol working without the US. And at some stage, it was obvious that US had to come back, but there was that issue. It was not a question of one government or the other, because the Senate had already taken this position that the US would not join Kyoto. So a new agreement under the convention, you remember the convention was signed in Rio in 1992, in that very positive moment of the fall of the Soviet Union. So there was a positive spirit in international and in multilateralism in general. So we had the convention, which is, by the way, the name is the Framework Convention, under which we could have protocols, agreements, etc. So we first had the Kyoto Protocol under the convention, then we had the Paris Agreement under the convention. And so we negotiated the Paris Accord for the US to join. So the fact that the US leaves an agreement that was designed for the US to join, and it was designed for the US to join exactly not to, it was an agreement that did not need to pass through the Senate. So it is an agreement mostly of voluntary decision. Because if it was mandatory decisions, then it would go through senators. So it is already a voluntary agreement. So the US absence will change many things. But as you said, the United States is not only the United States government. The United States is also a country of amazing technology, amazing academic centers, of amazing businessmen, and also of amazing local governments that are still fully committed with the fight against climate change. So if you think in GDP terms, I think that a very strong majority of the American GDP is going to continue to follow the decisions of the COP that, as I said, are in fact voluntary. So it's not that the US has left an agreement that is that restrains the flexibility of the United States. It just so I think that there is this openness for all the other stakeholders to continue to follow what is decided at COPs as if the country was.
Excellent. Now looking at the scale and scope of COP30, recently I saw an interview of Minister Marina Silva where she described COP30 as sóbria, a word that can be translated to measured, reserved, modest in English. So reflecting obviously the need to address the urgency of the climate crisis and the vulnerability of the Amazon region. Why we see COP28 in Dubai with more than 80,000 delegates and COP30 in Belém expected to host around 40,000, 50,000, if I'm not mistaken. Do you see this smaller scale as an opportunity for more focused negotiations, or does it risk limiting engagement?
Well, I think it's interesting you mentioned Minister Marina Silva's comment. And by the way, I was there when she mentioned that to the president. And it is a very important point that she made, because some people were thinking that the COP was going to be like the Olympics or the World Cup, and that we should have rock concerts, major fun events, etc., etc. No, we're talking about a very serious issue. Climate change is not good news. We have no reason to go and party while we are negotiating and discussing climate change. That's the meaning when she says sobre, in the sense that it's not about a party. It's about doing serious things to fight climate change. And I think she's completely right in that sense, that we have to make sure that the COP must use its many dimensions to inspire solutions and not to inspire a feeling that you are enjoying the moment. You know, that's the idea of her comment. And why that? Because I think that there are four very important dimensions of the COP that have to be well used. No? First, you have the negotiations themselves, which are the basis of the COP. The COP is the meeting of the countries that are part of the Framework Convention and of the Paris Agreements. So there must be the negotiation itself, which is an agenda that was determined by all the members, so 196 countries, and this is something that we have to follow that agenda and try to get as ambitious solutions as possible. So that's the formal negotiation. Then you have what is called the action agenda. The action agenda is something that developed very strongly in recent years, which is a series of events and even of decisions of groups, sometimes of countries, but sometimes sectoral decisions or, for instance, cities get together and announce pledges. And this has been a very important part of the COP. I mean, that business, for instance, if you have a sector of the economy in which the 25 most important companies in the world say, we are going to be carbon neutral by 2040, this is a major statement. And it has a very strong impact on the positions of the countries that are the only ones that can negotiate the formal negotiations. No, it's only for countries. So the action agenda opens the doors to local governments, to companies, to academia, etc., to expand the ambition of what can be achieved against climate change, but also these are the actors that are going to translate to everyday life what is decided in those very sometimes difficult to understand documents that are agreed by the countries. So when a country signs a document, for instance, deciding that we're going to triple renewable energy by 2035 in the whole world, this is something that the private sector is going to have an essential role in it. Legislators are going to have an essential role in it. So you have to hear the voices of all those that are responsible for implementing the document. So you have the formal negotiation, you have the action agenda. Then you have the heads of states, the leaders meeting. The leaders meeting also has to have its own logic. So we have also to work very hard on what are we going to obtain from the meeting of the leaders. And fourth, it is somehow the perception of the COP by the world civil society, by everybody. What did you think of that COP? How did that COP show that it's going to affect your life? And this fourth dimension invite or obliges the country that is presiding to really try to have a dialogue with all possible stakeholders. And someone the other day, I was discussing that and used a good expression. I mean, they said that this fourth dimension is the soft power of COPs. And the soft power of COPs is very important because even if you have, from a formal point of view, only negotiators discussing documents that become international legislation, the soft power of COPs is immense and we have to use it best possible. So it's not about partying, it's not about having fun, it's about really getting together using the real power, using the heads of states, using the main stakeholders, all that together with that soft power to make sure that the COP touches the real world, the real economy, touch and can be understood by people as something that is changing really lives and attitudes.
That's a great point. And also, I see more and more increasing the cost of not engaging in those agendas for the private sector specifically, because users, consumers, shareholders, they demand that presence. That's a great point, Ambassador. You touched on that, and I want to go back to it a little bit more about energy and Brazil's climate leadership. At COP28, the UAE consensus set very ambitious global targets to double energy efficiency by 2030, triple renewable energy capacity. Yet, just over a year later, we see some energy companies scaling back their commitments, some private sector climate leaders gone quiet on their pledges. How you think Brazil's leadership breath like life back into these ambitions, not just like lofty goals? How can we see actionable outcomes in global markets? And also, how can Brazil leverage its position, particularly in Latin America, to attract investments in critical minerals, energy, and hydrogen, which are so much like of our untapped potential. I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, this is a very interesting way of putting it, because it comes back a little to what I was saying before, that one thing is the commitment of a country. When a country commits, like for instance the NDCs that have to be presented, when a central government commits to something, it has to be something that is taken into consideration by the entire government, by the entire country. When we're talking about sectors like renewables or like oil or whatever, then it is very different according to the countries. In some countries, oil, for instance, is 90% of their economy. In other countries, oil is 10% of their economy. No? And so what is interesting is that we have somehow to decouple what is the position of the country, because the country has, that's why people say that the countries are very modest, or sometimes they are very shy in their determination, because they know that the big issue regarding climate negotiations is that fighting climate change has a huge impact in the economy. And this huge impact in the economy is extremely different from country to country. So for a country to triple renewables, for instance, it is an enormous effort that will require, for instance, massive investment. So as you were mentioning, the financing of this is absolutely key. So you cannot ask a country, even more a developing country, that already has some difficulty to develop itself and reduce poverty with the circumstances that they have, to add a new element, which is the fight against climate change in that effort. So the world has to support this country, either by providing resources, or at least to make finance more available and investments in larger scale than they are having. So each country has to find its own way forward. In a large country like Brazil, we know that very well, because we see how different the solutions are depending on the region, because the country is so diverse that the solution for some of the Amazonic states is completely different from the south of Brazil. And even among Amazonic states, you have completely different circumstances. So when we commit to something, each country has to show its way to get there. And where are we getting to? We are getting to climate neutrality, carbon neutrality, that most countries committed to 2050. So you have a way forward in which this evolution has to happen, but has to happen in tailor-made conditions. No? And then we come to finance, because finance ends up being absolutely key, because the majority of the world is a developing world. Most countries are developing countries. So if you have this circumstance, you need to have support of developed countries. That is very clearly stated in the Framework Convention and also in the Paris Accord. The problem is that, as you mentioned, when the US, for instance, leaves, or if another country changes its mind, the developed countries change their mind and reduce their support for the fight against climate change, how do we find alternative finance for that? Find solutions for that. So this is an absolutely central theme in the discussions of the.
That's excellent. One of the things that we've seen is people mentioning that there is a certain level of contradiction between Brazil's leadership in climate diplomacy and its push for oil exploration in the equatorial margin. And given the global and pressure for fossil fuel phase out and Brazil's dual role as both an energy powerhouse and a climate leader, how do you see this tension playing out in the negotiations at COP30? And how do you think that Brazil can navigate these competing priorities while maintaining its credibility on the global stage?
Well, this is a very important issue also. I think that what we all need, all the countries need, is a huge internal debate to have the support of society to go ahead with the policies that are being announced in the middle and long term. For instance, the NDCs are for 2035, the new ones that are being announced. So society has to be conscious of the by 2035 with the commitments that the countries are announcing in their NDCs and on the way to carbon neutrality, as I said, that most countries is 2050. So what I believe is that there are different ways to go ahead, even more for large economies and countries that have many opportunities like Brazil. The fact is that some countries have much less options and have to go strictly on one direction, depending on the circumstance, again, depending on finance. But the fact is that Brazil has to decide by itself which is going to be the way towards its mid and long-term effort. So, but we have to look that the paths can be quite surprising. So, for instance, if you look at Saudi Arabia is investing enormously in renewable energies. It's probably going to be 50%, its electricity is going to be 50% renewable by 2030. So Saudi Arabia is extremely ambitious with its renewables project. At the same time, you have a country like Germany that, because of geopolitical circumstances, but also by the decision not to have nuclear energy, has come back to more coal on the way to carbon neutrality. So the paths towards carbon neutrality can be surprising, can be, let's say, dictated by many different circumstances according to the country. What is really necessary is for the countries to have an internal agreement, with its population of how it's going to fight climate change. In the case of some countries, the main concern is the increase in the price, for instance, of electricity. Some governments are worried they are going to lose elections because the electricity bill goes up. Other countries' main concern is food security. So they have to concentrate on that thing. So we have to respect that since countries operate as a complex entity and not as sectors, they have probably, in many cases, to take some decisions that are not the decisions that the neighbor will take.
Excellent. One question about climate and conflict, because we see that at the same time, the world is like grappling with the impacts of climate change. Many of the most vulnerable regions, like the Middle East, Sudan, are also facing insecurity and prolonged conflicts. And we saw in COP28 the Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery, and Peace. In Baku, we saw the call on climate action for peace, relief, and recovery, which have, I think, acknowledged the links between climate and conflict, climate and peace. So these countries are obviously the most vulnerable to climate change, and they continue to receive the least climate finance. Do you expect meaningful progress on this issue at COP30, and how Brazil plans to put that in the agenda?
Look, this is a very important point that demonstrates how the climate issue has expanded its relevance in all the main diplomatic discussions. Because there are some people that still confuse climate with environment. They think that when we're talking about climate, it's about environment. No, climate is about the economy, is about poverty, is about technology, is about innovation, and is about also many elements that touch the issue of peace and conflict. Now, what we must make sure is that we use this to contribute to peace and to contribute to reducing the tensions that climate change can bring. And unfortunately, as we all know, climate change has been interpreted as a driver for immigration, for instance. It has many consequences. So in that context, President Lula has launched at the G20 the idea of that the world should be thinking of having an entity at the UN that could be a climate change council that could unite the treatment of climate in the very many entities of the United Nations. Because the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is the right place for us to negotiate climate. But we cannot, at this stage, not recognize that climate is touching other sectors of the international negotiations, be it trade, for instance. In trade, it has a very strong impact also. So the idea that President Lula expressed is that we have to think how we can mainstream climate in the UN system. And even more, because in the Brazilian G20, President Lula led the idea that we have to discuss climate, not only among climate ministries and foreign ministries, but we had a task force in the G20 that also included the ministers of finance and the presidents of central bank discussing together with ministers of climate and ministers of foreign affairs, because if finance is a key issue, and finance is essential for countries to be able to fulfill their pledges at the UNFCCC, we must involve the financial institutions, because these institutions have much more impact. IMF, World Bank, multilateral development banks in general have much more impact than the UNFCCC, which is the locus, the right locus for the negotiation. But we have seen the limits of the UNFCCC regarding implementation. And the world is asking for implementation. I think that the world is a bit tired of seeing documents being signed and not seeing the results of these documents. So this is something that Brazil is going to try to work very hard in the preparation of COP.
That's great to hear. I think the word implementation is really important in this framing, especially when you bring the world to the Amazon, to an urban area in the Amazon, right? Where you see that you have also the challenge at the local level and so forth. I have a question that came from our audience, more specifically from our chair, Ambassador Anthony Harrington, a former U.S. ambassador to Brazil. He asks, what are the expectations of U.S. government participation in COP meeting? You touched on that, but would you like to comment a little bit more on this?
Well, we have to see how we're going to we still don't know how this is going to evolve, because the new American government is changing many things in many contexts, and so let's see how this evolves. But obviously, Brazil is completely open to engage with all countries. I think this is one of the, let's say, one of the contributions that Brazil can have in these discussions is that Brazil is one of the very few countries that have relations with all the countries in the world. So we engage with everybody, and we believe that there can only be a solution to climate change through cooperation. And there are many ways that we can find the way to cooperation. So we are totally open to talk to the American government and to try to find ways of getting them more and more involved, or to getting them involved in the way that they will be more comfortable to engage, like we do with the other countries. But we have to make sure that this is a center of dialogue, and that we can progress in this dialogue in this very, very challenging year, and with the climate urgency which can be felt in basically every country in the world.
So now leading towards the end of our wonderful conversation, and I could be here longer, but I wanted to hear from you, like your picture. How does a successful COP30 looks like to Brazil? What are Brazil's absolute priorities? What is this? How you wanna see how you see this successful COP30, this picture of it?
Yeah. Well, I thank you for the question, but I have to tell you that we've been talking in the government, talking to President Lula. We have many paths that we can follow because, as I told you, we have different instruments. We have the negotiation itself, we have the action agenda, we have the leaders summit, and we have also how to engage with the international civil society and so many stakeholders. So we hope we can get palpable results. I think that what we would love to have at COP30 is, first, we have to listen to many countries. We cannot come with the formula, hey, hello guys, let's approve this final formula that we just got for you at COP30. This is not going to happen. So what we want is to take these months ahead and discuss, listening to top economists, top scientists, top experts in technology, and obviously the countries and the groups and the sectors, some of which are very concerned about the impact of climate change in their activities. So we're still in a very strong listening mode. So we are very open to suggestions. But what we really want is for the world to have a perception that these negotiations have positive consequences, that multilateralism has to be strengthened, because this is still the best way for the world to cooperate. But we know that we have to be able to translate what and under the UNFCCC in a way that people really not only understand, but commit to these efforts. Because you have to bring back some optimism of people, and not only think of doom and think that, because when you talk all the time about doom, people say, well, it's finished, there's nothing else to do. I have friends who say, I'm not going to have children because of that negotiation and things like that. No, this is absolutely not the spirit. We have to bring back a kind of realistic optimism. And this optimism can come from the fact that there are many solutions available. There are many examples of successful policies. There are resources, there are technological solutions. They are just not very clear. So let's try to make it clear and use COP30 as a moment of renewal, a moment in which we bring back trust in these efforts, demonstrating that these things have an impact. There is only one number that I think is the easiest number and is always very good to remember. is that according to a majority of scientists, before the Paris Accord, 10 years ago, we were on our way of probably reaching more than 4 degrees above the average of the pre-industrial era. So we were going towards 4 degrees or more. Most scientists today agree that we are now, after 10 years of Paris, on the way to 2.7 or 2.3. So we still have to work a lot to try to reach 1.5, which is our aim. But you can see that if it was not for Paris, we would be heading to 4. This kind of information is the kind of information that can bring back the trust in these efforts. But we have to work harder on that, because I think that the tendency of experts, the tendency of negotiators is to only talk about among themselves. And this had very negative consequences, and we have to overcome that.
Great, thanks for your answer. Way better than my question, because I think you said something really important, which is the importance of the path. It reminds me of the idea of there is no path. The path is made by walking. I think it's important to remember everyone of the importance of diplomacy and dialogue. And I think you were a great representation of that, Ambassador, with your career. And I want to thank you for sharing your insights with us here today. Your leadership in shaping COP30 is critical, and we look forward to seeing you in Belém and to see how Brazil's presidency drives us towards very ambitious climate action. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your presence with us here today.
Bruna, and thank you for the Wilson Center for organizing this event. And thank you for all those that are listening to me and have the patience to stay until the end of my comments.
Of course, and I'm sure they wanted to hear more. Hopefully we'll have another chance to talk. Before we wrap up, I want to thank everyone watching. I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to invite you all to also stay engaged with the Wilson Center for more discussions on the road, on the path, as I said, walking towards COP30. And before I wrap up, I'd like to invite my colleague, Julia Spies, who is going to show you briefly a little bit more about what we are planning to do to engage at COP30 and in this path towards Belém in November 2025. Thank you all very much. Julia, the floor is all yours.
Yay, thank you, Bruna. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today. And most importantly, thank you, Ambassador, for your insights and availability. So before concluding this interesting conversation, we would like to present our new initiative called Casa Wilson Center, which is our special venue in Belém during the first week of COP30. So our space has a capacity for 150 people and will serve as a hub for debate and networking for public, private, and civil society stakeholders. We will offer events, roundtables, and private dinners on topics like sustainable agriculture and food security, renewable energy, and adaptation. And we are also really happy that we are going to announce during COP30 the first winner of the Wilson Center Lovejoy Award, another initiative that celebrates Thomas Lovejoy and recognizes emerging leaders in Latin America in environmental conservation. So please reach out for partnerships, ideas, or questions. And I thank you all again for participating. Thank you again, Ambassador, and you all have a wonderful day.